Thanks, Kenji. Well, it's really pleasant to um, sharing some with you. I think it's very well, very happy to see you again and to see all of you. Yeah. So I shall start as now.
Yeah, please start.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I think it's a little bit weird about the title or talk about process research. Actually, the whole presentation is about it's about something of my work as applying a process approach into information studies. And I think, well, my personal experience is when we apply in process research, it could produce an alternative view in information studies. So as today's talk will talk about, I think, majorly two issues. Firstly is process research, what is it? And I will give you an example of my recent studies, process research, information studies, and there is a short part talking about implications of how process research means to information studies. So it is, okay, firstly we'll start with process research. I think process research is something different because always like Norbert saying we say the wind is blowing as if wind was separate from the blowing, as if a wind could exist which does not blow. That was showing some kind of interesting phenomenon when we're talking because as the fake of the language, we usually talk about nouns and entities in our research. We're looking at relationships of different entities and trying to think about how different quantities and different relationships matters when we are looking at different research questions. That is what we usually do, and that is not process-driven research. And Nobel saying is just to showing us in some situations, nouns or sometimes they are actually action or they actually cannot be fully separated from the process of acting. Okay, there is a relationship between different entities, but we also need to pay attention to the verb that makes the entity continuing. Well, as Langley suggested, actually in social science, there are two different kinds of theory. Usually what we're looking at is variance theory, which is trying to think about the antecedents and outcomes. We're looking at a lot of factors and looking at their outcomes. And in that way, our focus is actually usually on the relationships. But when you think further, for example, as we shown in the graph, okay, when we think about antecedents as whatever example like input to output, we're usually looking at what are the input and what are the output. And we know there is an arrow between input and output. But in variance theory, we usually do not explore what does the arrow means. It's actually a series of actions. Well, for example, when you study economics, economics telling you how many input and then we can go to how many output. That is usually what we learn. But actually, if you notice, the field of management is just telling you what is the actual process of converting input to output. This is actually complex and underestimated in various theory that has been established in economics. And another part is process theory. Process theory is looking at the changing state of different events or activities. There is a sequential, chronological sequence of things that are happening. And in these studies, we usually focus on understanding how a process happen, how a change, merge, grow, and terminates. So it's a different perspective in understanding social phenomenon. We're not only looking at the quantities, the relationships, but we investigate into the detail of the sequence and the temporal order of different activities. So in process theory, we usually think about as a change over time. What is change over time? It can be, well, many different things that are change over time, and we're looking at how a people or an individual or a group or organization or whatever can move from one state to another. So process theory is more dealing with the temporal issue. Well, when we before we go in further, I think we need to know some basics about what is a process. Well, we'll not give a very definite definition of process because um, there are many variants of process, and usually when we're looking at a process, it is actually a complex concept because it's not only including the temporal orders or the chronological sequence of events, it also including the different actors and different levels of actors within the process. Usually we will think about the meaning of process, would usually including a few different features. Firstly, it's a logic that explains causal relationship. It does not necessarily need always to be a causal relationship because when you investigate causal relationships, you will notice everything we have is firstly is a chronological or a sequential relationship between two factors or between two events before you can establish any causal relationships. So a process usually is a logic related to that. When there is a process, then we can investigate whether within the process there exist any causal relationships. But actually, in the more common scenarios, we're usually looking at the temporal orders or sequences of events. So that is that is the main issue we dealing with in the process research. And in whatever process, it involves a category of concept or variables. Of course, it's in a different way because in variance theory, we're looking at more about the relationships. Okay, it's operationalized concepts and the variables and how they change. But in the process theory, we also need a few concepts, and we're looking at how the concepts related to each other over time. And well, in a most common scenario, process also means a narrative of how things change over time. The most important feature, I think, we usually when looking at the process, whenever you're asking for what is a process, people are telling you a story or a few narratives about what is the activity and how people acting them over time. So that is things changing over time, and that means a process. Of course, within any process, we need a different perspective because when we're looking at relationships or variance theory, we usually have a fixed or very certain view or unit of analysis. But in process, the unit of analysis can be quite complex. For example, if you're looking at a process of organizational change, so it's not just dealing with change at organization level, but it also dealing with change at individual level, and then at group level, and then at organization level. And sometimes the change is also related to other issue at within the society or within a particular time and space context. So process can be quite in our time can be quite diverse, and it involves different layers and different actors. So it's process research, we usually say it's really colorful, and that is some basics because I think it is important to understand the processes from a somehow different perspective, but not necessarily it means a totally different perspective, because in information studies, we also have some kind of established process model, but it's not truly as the process we have. I'm talking with you later. So the example I'm talking with you is some of my recent studies. It's the basic research question is talking about, well, we studied Chinese humanities scholars. We're looking at how they participate into digital humanity projects. Okay, so our overall research question is how they participate into digital digital humanity projects. And why we want to know this, because I think it's a little bit relevant to establish theory on information behavior. Well, we usually have studies on information behavior of humanities scholars. I don't know whether it's like a bias, because humanities scholars, they seem to have a very different information behavior in their academic or in the academic studies than, well, other scholars in other fields. So there is something on that. But when our initial attention was to think about their special process, what are they process engage with digital humanities. But at the meantime, we also think about another common topic can be related to that is technology acceptance. We usually think about accepting new technology from a TM or technology acceptance models perspective of humanities scholars. Why they do that things and how they do that things. Actually, a very important limitation of previous studies is, for example, technology acceptance is usually talking about the antecedents of technology acceptance. For example, what are the factors affecting their technology acceptance intention? But it actually does not give us much information about what is the detail, how they actually accepting a new technology, whether there is like loops or setbacks, or it's a quite straightforward process. So that is the thing. I think that is the two slightly different perspectives that we can use to investigate the research question. Well, in our initial design, we actually followed both perspectives. We're looking at the information behavior, but we also think about some issues related to technology acceptance, because we think they both are quite relevant to the question. And the research design, we actually did multiple case study. We talk about a lot of, firstly, we have chosen a few Chinese scholars in humanities who have experience or successful experience in digital humanities. Actually, we cannot find out all potential digital humanities scholars who have experienced the digital humanity. So the strategy we use is, firstly, we're looking at the successful ones who has published papers in digital humanities, or who have already have projects directly on digital humanities. Well, within that, when we are contacting with these interviewees, we also asking them, okay, do you know any, for example, do you know any scholars that are good at digital humanity in your field, or they are thinking about accepting digital humanity in the field? So we use the we use this scholar's recommendation to find other potential interviewees, and here we find almost everyone. And actually we have, because humanity is a very broad field, there are many different subfields, so we are looking at different fields as well. For example, we have people in history, in philosophy, and in Chinese studies. So finally, we got 11 interviewees, and after all the interviews, we found there are almost 8 value cases. It doesn't mean that the other 3 are useless, because they are, for example, they share some common patterns in their engagement with inhumanity. So we don't need to replicate them too much. We just choose 8 of them, which we think is more typical cases. And well, during the data connection, we have around about 33 interviews. We actually did 2-round interview because we have to make sure that we got all the information related to their engagement in humanities. And the second round is almost about asking backup questions, clarifying for the details of of some uncleared issue within the first round. So it's almost 35 hours of interviews. We also did observation on their engagement, looking at their behavior, how they actually using digital humanity tools, how they collaborate with other scholars from other fields, mainly their technical technical backgrounds mainly. And the protocol for data connection, including 3 sections. Well, firstly, it's about their rationale to engage in digital humanity and their experience, particularly like how they start to engage with digital humanities and how they experience over time. And well, we usually asking is about let them to tell us about the projects they're involved in and how the outcome, and finally we're asking about the overall evaluation and whether they think, for example, whether they think digital humanities is helpful, and whether it's helpful in what sense, and do they willing to engage in digital humanity further. So that is the overall about the research design. And for the findings, we have we firstly is about the motivation of the participants. Why they engage in digital humanities. We found almost there are 3 different types of motivations. So firstly, is more intrinsic motivation. I think this is mainly like driven by curiosities. For example, they say, okay, I think digital humanities is interesting and there's something new. And they think, okay, use the digital humanity tools, they can rethink the traditional topics, and they can, well, it is maybe helpful for recovering of the research questions they already have, and they think it's a more efficient way to deconstruct and read materials. And some others is more optimistic motivation. In this, it's more related to like digital humanities can help us to apply projects either, and it's the whole topic, so there are more opportunities. The more opportunities usually is not actually research opportunity, but actually the opportunities. So we think it looks more opportunistic. And the third type of motivation is social influence. It doesn't mean it means the individual usually they do not have a strong motivation themselves, but actually it's a social influence by others. For example, some guys say, my supervisor is doing digital humanity, so I just followed. And some others say, okay, that is actually a project. It's established digital humanity tools, and they usually provide trainings to humanity scholars, so they were willing to use these tools. So they usually provide the trainings, and the humanity scholars, they can learn and they can use the tools. So it's like the influence from other scholars. So that is typically what their motivations to participate. Well, it is important to have the motivations because we want to know whether what are their intentions actually. Well, engage in digital humanities. So that would help us to further clarify what potentially how they will do in participating in digital humanities. So the next part is about what are the strategies. Well, it's like I don't know that. Well, I don't think it's a really a good summary of strategy here because well, by strategies we actually mean it's what is their overall way or overall approach to participating in digital humanities. For example, the first strategy is exit. Well, like somebody was thinking, one of the interviewees, I think it's actually not. I think it's actually there are three guys who think digital humanities is too technical. While when they learn how to perform different tasks, they think the tools is actually underdeveloped, and they don't think they can learn this technical issue, and so the choice is to exit or give up. So that is one thing. They don't like to do them anymore. And there's another case. Well, it's like say digital humanities is not as expected as and it's not actually helpful. So there are many data, but because the humanities scholars, well, actually I'm referring all Chinese human scholars, they not participate into developing the database they use. So the data are rich, but they found they're useless. And there are also strategies they trying, because in this strategy, it's like they have a very they have different kinds of motivations to participate into what is not truly participating. It's just saying, I heard digital humanities is helpful, so I just trying. For example, this guy said, I tried to use CBDB. It's a China bibliographic database. Well, it's for it's established by the Department of History of Harvard University and Peking University. So they know clearly what are the advantage and disadvantage. And they just trying these tools, and that is also well, it looks like a learning process, or they're trying to think about what they can do and how they can do with digital humanity tools. And the experience with the trying is very important to inform them whether to choose to go on use the tools or choose to give up. But generally, I found most of the scholars, when they heard digital humanities is helpful, they are always trying to do something with digital humanities. And some other guys were thinking about, okay, their tryings like they learn tools. Actually, this is a geographical information system tools, and they say, I know the principles about how the tools works, but well, she cannot use the tools as well as her students. So he's just keep trying, and when there is a need, he will ask. She will asking the students to help him. And we also found there are a type of engagement as partially adopting. Well, why we think it's partially? Because if we're looking at the examples, like we think digital humanity is important and helpful, but it's too technical. When they think it's too technical, well, this guy does not actually give up digital humanities, but they think when I want to complete my research tasks with digital humanities, I have to collaborate with technical guys. Well, in this way, they actually you can think it's like outsource the technical part to the technical guys. And well, this guy is just using digital humanity, but he knows there is tools and there is well, ways of, for example, automatically processing the data. And for example, that is a very typical approach, like how to automatically processing the data. And he cannot do it himself. And there is no established tools, because when they want to do some research, their requirement is actually very unique. So they need a technical guy to help them to customize the data, customize, for example, the algorithm, or customize the tools to specifically to the project. And some guys are thinking about, well, they are able to acceptance fully. It means, for example, the acceptance is also very interesting. For example, for the first guy, is like in their view, they think I think it's helpful for use the full text database because we can retrieval and access to the original works. And the other functions think they are not too helpful because in fields such as history, they usually need the original works to help them to construct the theory and to, well, their approach to the scientific approach is mostly dealing with the original works. And also there are much more proactive acceptance. Well, for acceptance, it's more like I know the technology and I can use it quite well. Well, partially adopting is more like I know the technology, I want to use the technology, but it's too technical for me, and I need to find some solutions to solve the issue. Okay, but for proactive acceptance, the thing is, well, it's also like, for example, as this interviewee said, it's like digital humanity is a transformation. So it's a cyber infrastructure. So it's a different approach to generate knowledge. And in that process, it's not only accepting digital humanity in his common research, but it's also to disseminate digital humanities to other colleagues within the field, and they also seeking partnerships with the technology researchers. So it's more proactive, not only using the technology, but it's like to promotion the technology, and sometimes they also developing tools. So it's much more proactive. So there are different types of engagement. So they can have different strategy to participate into the digital humanity in different ways. Okay. And more importantly, we're not only looking at their motivation and how they do in digital humanity, we're also looking at what are their paths. Okay, there are different paths. Well, this is truly related to the process I'm talking about. So what are the paths? We also found there are three typical paths of researchers who have finally accepted the technology. For example, the first type is about trial engagement. It's actually starts from trying. So the first stage they have is trying. Well, it's a little bit complex because before they start trying, they have a perception of the technology. They think the technology is useful. And this is most typical scenario. They think the technology is useful and they're trying to use it. But after trying, they can have very different experience. And that experience will make them to think about whether or not to accept or to reject the technology. For example, the trying is, there are some trying, well, these actually are their outcome of the trying or the personal experience with trying. For example, a particular interviewee in a let's say, okay, the existing databases are actually difficult to use. Okay, they're text heavy and the data are quite loose structured. They don't think they have much value. And another interviewee tell us is like they think they are well, they know it's a new thing, so they think about they need to change their scholarship. They can't keep this traditional scholarship as always. So however, this guy is not sure about whether or not they can learn the new technology because, well, it's not easy to learn and there's a learning curve and it's increased the workload. So they usually have his solution is also to find friends as a partnership. And well, this friend is in computer science background, and so they can ask for help quite often. So actually, it's a little bit, well, if you're looking at this case, it's actually showing when after they trying, they found there's some problems, but they're trying to solve the problems. Okay, so that is a very important thing. So after trying, we actually can see different scenarios. Somebody, as I mentioned, for example, as H3, think, well, after the trying, they think it's not as helpful as I expected, then I choose to quit. And the other path is like, after trying, they think it is useful. So we think that it is contingent on their personal experience. And when we're looking at the stage 2, it's all about decision, whether or not they want to go into finally to whether we need to really participate or engage with digital humanities. Somebody after trying, they're actually using the tools and then they quit. For example, H3, okay, they think they don't think a digital humanity can actually impact humanity scholarship truly, because it cannot produce different sources of data or different versions of data. It doesn't help us to find out more data, but it's actually a different presentation of data in a digital format. So they think, I don't want to participate in digital humanities because they are not valuable. And some others, for example, H7 is like, they think, digital humanities is very helpful, but we need to solve the technical issue. And well, as he said, he's still trying to adapt to digital humanity, but he gained more confidence with it. It's showing a try as a very important mechanism of their engagement. Okay, it's actually, this is quite different than traditionally expected, because if you're looking at established theory on technology acceptance, it's actually telling us people would judge the value of technology neither by their perceived usefulness and ease of use, right? But actually by trying, it means when you have the perceived ease of use or perceived usefulness of the technology, actually you're trying and verifying it. When you found, okay, it's actually go beyond from perception, you are actually using the technology and realize whether it is truly useful. Maybe the expectation is not useful, but when you're trying it, you will realize it's really useful, or it's not as useful as I expected. So it's well, in this sense, accepting technology is not that straightforward. There is a process for the users to think about and to experience the technology before they can make a final decision on acceptance. Okay, so another way is adaptive engagement. We call them adaptive. It's slightly different than trying, because trying is more like well, they experience with the experiencing the technology, and they got some feeling, and they try to make decisions on that. But by adaptive, we're actually looking at its adaptation process. Within the adaptation process, the users are actually solving problems within the process of engagement. For example, well, in stage 1, we found they usually are having positive motivations. And in stage 2, it's also contingent on their initial experience, but different from triers. When they have unpleasant experiences, they will not give up immediately. They are usually think about different solutions to like to overcome the difficulties or overcome the problems they have faced in the engagement. Okay, so for example, one of the interviewees telling us, okay, the existing research infrastructure or the established digital tools, they are developed by well, experts from computer science field, and they usually ignore the humanity researchers' needs, and they don't care about the information behavior. So these usually don't have background knowledge of the humanities discipline, and they are not able to organize the data and illustrate knowledge as the digital humanities, the humanities scholars needs. So they found when you're using the tools developed by them, actually it's really frustrating. And for example, another guy is trying GIS and he says, well, GIS is really helpful. Okay, particularly it's because it can provide a high space precision, and that is really helpful for his research. So he is trying to learn it, like asking the GIS technology expertise, and is also participate in training classes from the internet. Okay, so and that is always like neither through learning or through problem solving. These guys were thinking about how they can adapt into digital humanities. So it's slightly different than trial. And we also found another way of engagement, which we call them stimulated engagement. Actually, these are, well, in the first stage, it's actually the same. They're actually experiencing. But these guys usually, when they're in stimulated engagement, they actually have a very different motivation. Usually, these guys, the motivation for them is neither instinct or neither opportunities. They are usually social influence. They participate into digital humanities because, for example, the supervisor do that, and one of their friends is doing that. They just be invited and they participate into the project. So they do not have a very clear motivation. Okay, and they don't have a quite clear vision or clear view about what is digital humanities and how can we do with it. So what they usually do is especially the experiencing or the trying with digital humanities. And usually, as they don't know much about technology, they usually have a very bad experience. Okay, so what, for example, these guys like they know that digital humanities can helpful, but they think what they need in humanities research is interpreting. They are interpreting the original works. They're interpreting a lot of works, present works as well. But computers, they cannot do interpretation. So they know their digital humanity tools can help them to connect a lot of data, but they have to collect the data. And when they collect the data, it also involves huge efforts. So the thing is actually does not make big differences with traditional humanities scholarship, yeah. So it means when they're experiencing, they usually get a bad experience with them. And actually, digital humanities does not meet their expectations. But the stage 2 is different. There is a stimulating process. For example, well, one of the researchers, when they got the when they have frustrating experience with digital humanities, then they have, well, there is an opportunity for them to participate into workshop held by libraries, give them a second chance to learn more about digital humanities. These guys actually are training the humanities scholars what they can do, because when they are exploring with the digital humanity tools themselves, they're actually not truly knowing what are the functions, what are the logic of the functions, and what are the full potential of the functions. So they don't know them quite well. They're just knowing some basic functions, but they don't know the advanced functions. So they cannot have a very good experience. And well, within the workshop, actually, the librarians and the technical staff are trying to help the digital humanities, help the humanities scholars to customize the digital humanities to specifically to the researchers' needs. Okay, when, for example, when they need a particular function, they can perform some or not full, not whole within the digital humanity tools. Some are helpful, some are not truly helpful, but we know there's a potential. So in this way, when there are stimulus or when they are helpful from external side, these humanity researchers, they change their mind about digital humanity. You can also think it's like when they encountered problems they are actually not solving by themselves. Okay, they are looking at they are actually looking at external support, and external support is quite, I think it's quite somehow random. Okay, they're not they don't have a very, for example, they don't have a very usual or very common routine for the external support to help the humanities scholars to fix their issue. But when they for example, they just happen to encounter this stimulating opportunities, then they will got a better experience. If not, they potentially will give up. So that is also that is the last type of stimulated engagement. So these are all the findings we have. Actually, through these findings, we think firstly, I think it's like to think about more of technology acceptance by humanities scholars. It's actually give us a different view. What within this view, we're looking at what are the detailed process. And within the discussion, we not truly have the full, the total discussion yet, but we're looking at some very important features. For example, if this allows us to rethink about technology acceptance. Well, for example, previously we think about technology acceptance as more about valuing technology by their usefulness and by the ease of use. But actually within, after my explanation, I think you may notice when there are problems with the usefulness of the technology, when they, for example, when they do not have when the humanities scholars, they don't have a specific perception of the usefulness of the technology. For example, they don't know whether it's helpful. They're actually adopting the digital humanity tools. They can try it. After trying, they will notice, okay, whether that is quite contingent on the experience. When they have good experience, think, okay, it's helpful. Otherwise, you think it's not helpful. So it means that the perception of technology can change, neither at usefulness or ease of use. And commonly, most humanities scholars found digital humanity tools is actually not ease of use because they don't have technology background. They don't truly know how to use the software, and they don't know how to programming. They cannot customize the tools to specifically to their research tasks. So even if that is the case, we found they actually can have acceptance as well. So that means when they have a perception for technology, they actually their perception is not only determined, not their acceptance behavior is not only determined by these perceptions. Actually, their motivation also matters. When they have a perception for the technology, they will have that will shape their acceptance motivation. And when they have a motivation, they will trying or exiting from digital humanity. And during that process, their cognitive abilities is quite important. When they think, for example, when they face any problems with their perceptions, for example, they think it's not quite useful, or they think there are problems when they need to use the technology. They need to use their cognitive problems. They need to use their cognitive abilities to solve the problems. So I'm not truly think about. I'm not truly have a clear conclusion on that part, but I think at the present, I think it is more relevant to think about problem solving is a very important dimension in accepting technology. When they can solve the problems so that they can change their perceptions, For example, when they think technology, the digital humanity is useful, and when they're trying it, actually they may get bad experience. But they can think about they can take actions to solve the problems when they found are difficult. In that process, it means problem solving is very useful in changing their original perception of technology. And during that process, there sometimes as stimulated engagement. External support is sometimes helpful in the stage. And finally, when they have tried with the technology and they updated their perception of technology, then they go back to think about whether or not they can truly accept the technology. So that is the first part. Is like, I think there are many repeated routines. So traditional theory as technology acceptance theory is helpful because it gives us a more specifically to give us all the factors that are useful for accepting technology. For example, ease of use, the perception of ease of use, and the perception of usefulness. These two dimensions are very important for technology acceptance. But we found sometimes when users are accepting a new technology, they may lack perception of ease of use, or they lack perception of usefulness, and they can use their cognitive abilities, or they can solve the problems, and finally to make themselves well, they will finally make themselves to discover the usefulness or ease of use of the technology after they have trying with the technology. So this process is actually about technology acceptance as a process is actually much more complex than what we know before. There is a learning and a problem solving perspective within the stage. We further looking at how the learning or how this happen. So it more specifically, we think at different stage, there is different consideration. So firstly, when they know there's a new technology, this is stage 0. They know, for example, they have awareness of the technology. They will make a decision whether they want to try or they want to exit. Okay, in the process, it's actually an adapting or learning process. They can, for example, learn about the background or learn about how the technology can be helpful, and they can learn by read literature or by read, for example, the instructions. And then when they learned about the usefulness of the technology, they think about to trying again. Okay, they will trying exactly with the technology. They're experiencing and the trials with the technology. For example, in our cases, like the digital humanity scholars, they're using digital humanity tools to think about whether using the tools can help to solve the problems. And in this stage, it also involves adapting and learning, and they will have their own experience after they have tried with the technology. They will confirm whether or not there is the technology is useful or not. If they think it's useful, then they will probably to consider another factors, which is move to next stage, that is think about the effort expectancy, which means whether or not the technology is ease of use. And if they don't think the technology has the performance expectancy as they expected, they will think about maybe they will think about to exit. Well, in the second stage, when they think about effort expectancy, they will also think about whether or not it's helpful, or well, whether or not, sorry, whether or not it's and they can use it smoothly. Well, in this stage, we found they can move to different scenarios. For example, when they think they can solve the problems, when they think it is not actually truly ease of use, but they can solve the problem, then it's like partial adoption. For example, in our cases, they are using digital humanity tools, but they actually not did them personally. They know what they can do with the tools, but they need technical guides to support them. And if they think, okay, they need too much effort in accepting this new technology, so they will think about give up. If they found, okay, they can accepting the technology with some, well, not too much efforts. For example, they can learn the technology, they can learn the technical issue, then they will think about to finally accept or engage with the technology. So we think technology acceptance is, there are stages within the process, and within each process, they actually are quite consistent with previous studies, but they are different in chronological order and in the conditions. So that comes to the final part of the presentation, which will not be quite much. So we'll talk about what might be the implications. I think we can think about in that research, we think about how information behavior can be seen as a process. It's actually when we're looking at a very tiny behavior, where it's not truly really, really complex. If you're looking at the outcome, it's actually the digital humanities, the humanities scholars interaction with digital humanity. So they finally give up, or they finally accept, or they finally find a way to accept the technology. That is showing they are actually more than an action. It's a process, and the process is a little bit complex. So that is to help us to think about. Sometimes we talk about too much of different actions, but how did people exactly act in it? I think the important thing from our story is not actually the final process of how they do things, but actually we found there are many setbacks during the process. There are some ways to exit from the process, to exit from accepting new technology, and there are ways for them to go through the process and finally accept the technology. So the process is very colorful. They can be contingent on different issues and different people. When they engage in digital humanities, they may have totally different processes. And another issue I think is very important is our research considered uncertain needs. Well, it's like uncertain information needs. The humanities scholars, actually, they do not have a very, very clear needs on how they can benefit from using digital humanities. So it is, well, because traditional theory will more suggested when we have specific information needs, we're trying to use technologies. But actually, sometimes the needs can be uncertain. They just know something very, very broadly. For example, digital humanity may help our research, but actually they don't know what exactly they can be helpful and how they can use, actually maybe they are not truly helpful. So when they have uncertain needs, they will think about the behavior is also become more uncertain. They will have trials, and they may firstly think about the awareness, and then they think about the process of thinking about different perceptions of the technology that are all involved in the behavior. And I think lastly, think about the learning process in using technology, or when they are within any information behavior. The users are actually learning something. They're actually not just only interacting with technology, but they do have learning and problem solving abilities. These are really important to make the process more diverse. So finally, I think it is also potential to applicate process research in further information studies. For example, if you think about more details, information seeking, information search or retrieval, this is most relevant, I think. What is a process and why the process can be different, contingent on different groups or different people, and more is about other actions. Whenever there is action, actually, they can all be, we can all use process research to do different things. Okay, so that is all for my presentation today. And welcome to any questions and comments.